They were alone. As they sat in the metal box, surrounded by blazing heat, 50 German tanks began to surround them. Ammunition was dwindling as they continued to load and fire their only weapon. Deafened from armor-piercing shells pounding against their heavily armored tank, the crew knew they weren't going to make it out alive. Yet they continued to fight valiantly against an unstoppable force. They weren't ready to give up. Welcome back, listeners, and ready yourselves for another episode of Beyond the Battlefield. It was 1941. Germany, still superfluously proud from their previous invasion of France and the other Western European nations, wanted to make a daring move. You see, at this point, Hitler believed him and his army were unstoppable, and desired even more land for Germany than he already occupied. Between him and his closest ally, Benito Mussolini, the leader of Italy, the two of them had conquered all of Western Europe, with the exception of Great Britain and the neutral countries. From northern Africa to Norway, there was an Italian flag or German banner, and such a feat was quite impressive indeed. However, the lust for more land made the Germans turn to the east. They turned toward their now temporary ally, the Soviet Union. On June 22nd of 1941, the biggest invasion force in history attacked all along the Soviet border, annihilating all Russian opposition. Operation Barbarossa has officially commenced. Just beforehand, the Germans attacked and took control over the Baltics in the south, consisting of Yugoslavia and Romania. Having these two countries under control meant that Germany's flanks were covered, and pressing into the Union would be less risky. Over 4 million German infantry charged through the borders with support from artillery, aircraft, and most importantly, tanks. The Russians were in full retreat and fell back towards their own borders, fighting as they went. The point is, the Russians were being invaded, and all they needed was time to prepare an effective defense that could hopefully stop the Germans. This seemed unlikely, though, because time was the one thing the Russians lacked. One of these countless battles that took place in the early days of Operation Barbarossa was the Battle of Versailles, taking place from June 22nd to June 27th. Here, 245 German panzers, or tanks, clashed against the Russian 749 tanks east of Versailles. Hundreds of shells were exchanged between the two sides as they fought each other over hundreds of yards. Despite being greatly outnumbered and outgunned, the German panzers were the winner of this battle. This was because of support from the Luftwaffe, or German Air Force, who had destroyed command posts in the area, along with other groups of Russian tanks. Not only did this weaken their Russian forces, but left them in disarray. Without commands on how to attack the Germans, the Russian tank forces fell into chaos. At one point during the battle, a group of Russian tanks believed they were attacking the sides of an unaware German tank division, which turned out to be the front of an entire attack force. This lack of communication allowed the better organized German panzers to destroy the chaotic Russian tanks. There were, however, losses for the Germans as well. The German tanks, which mostly consist of Panzer 35Ts, could not penetrate the armor of the Russian tanks themselves, and without air support, the German attack would have failed. That's because the power of the Russian tanks, which were known as unstoppable, could not be matched. The Germans, who faced them and survived, referred to the tanks as one thing: the Russian monsters. By June 24th, the Germans had pushed the Russians back, and the town of Versailles was German-controlled, or so they thought. While a convoy of trucks were carrying wounded German soldiers and Russian prisoners through the area, a Russian tank was spotted at a crossroads outside the town. The reason this single tank ended up here is still unknown, but what we do know was that it was a KV-1 tank, a Russian monster. The tank opened fire at the convoy, which turned around and retreated back towards the front lines. Later, A convoy bringing ammunition and other supplies made their way through the same crossroads. They were supposed to bring their cargo to the German front lines, but were surprised by the single tank that sat in the middle of the road. The KV opened fire, destroying the entire convoy of 12 trucks in a matter of minutes. The commander of the German forces in Sinai knew this tank had to be removed in order for supplies to be brought to the front lines. While firing at other German positions in the town, the KV-1 was surprised as 50mm anti-tank shells impacted its side. A German battery of anti-tank guns had fired upon the tank, and when the dust settled, the tank was still there. The KV-1's turret turned and fired at the battery, destroying it and its crew. At this point, it was known that the tank and its crew were not going to move, and were going to guard the crossroads until the last bullet. Rumors about these armored monsters terrified us, a German soldier had once said. Their size and invulnerability made us think of them as indestructible fortresses. The KV-1 and its crew continued to hold their ground under the blazing hot sun. German forces continued to attack the tank with different methods. A 105mm howitzer tried to fire on the vehicle, but the tank was too close and the shells missed. The next idea was to place an 88mm anti-aircraft gun, the only other weapon able to knock out such a heavily armored beast within range of the tank. But as the gun was being positioned, the perceptive crew spotted it and fired, destroying the gun and its crew. Like a castle's keep under siege, the tank stood its ground and held off against unlikely odds. Night approached, and the German forces in the town retreated overnight. Under the moonlight, a small group of infantry moved up towards the tank to plant explosives. The KV-1 crew, still fully alert, saw the troops at just the right moment and opened fire with their machine guns. The Germans frantically retreated, some of them being hit by the spray of gunfire. Despite this, the explosives were activated. The flash was bright in the blackness of the early morning. However, the indestructible fortress had lived up to its name and survived, with its 4-inch thick armor protecting it. Its powerful 76.2mm gun was also intact, allowing the tank to continue the fight the next day. As the sun rose on the morning of June 25th, 50 German panzers drove up from the horizon towards Sinai. The single Russian KV-1 tank stood its ground at the crossroads, despite the crew of the tank suffering from lack of sleep, ruptured eardrums, and the heavy heat from the summer sun above them. The panzers came from all angles, and the single KV-1 fired, reloaded, and fired again. The tank's cannon was glowing hot as continuous shells were shot from the barrel. The panzers themselves couldn't penetrate the KV-1's armor, so the tanks were instead used as a distraction. Meanwhile, another 88mm AA gun was positioned to fire at the tank. The gun fired at the Russian tank, scoring a direct hit. The crew's ears rang from the impact, but continued to fight, firing at the Germans. Another shot was fired and hit, but with no effect. Another, and then another. Only the 13th shot finally silenced the roar of the Russian tank. The battle was finally over. German infantry moved in on the tank to confirm the kill. Several soldiers moved up against the side and then knocked. More silence. Suddenly, a whirring sound emitted from the tank as the turret slowly began to turn again. The KV had somehow survived. As the German troops retreated, one of them frantically threw a grenade. The grenade slipped right through a hole from one of the 88mm gun's hits, and a loud bang sounded inside the tank. The turret stopped turning. Once again, the Germans moved in on the tank and opened the top hatch. All 6 of the Russian crew were killed. The Russian monster was finally slayed. A rare event occurred afterwards. To honor the amazing fight the crew put up against overwhelming odds, the Germans buried all 6 of the crew. To this day, the single gravestone can still be seen outside of Versailles. 2 crew member names are on the gravestone, along with 1 set of initials. The other 3 crew members are still unknown. This bold stand lasted almost 24 hours, weakening the German front lines from the lack of troops, tanks, and supplies. But most of all, this amazing act bought the Russians the one thing they needed most. They bought the Russians time. I'm your host, Gabriel Brooker. The script, graphics, and podcast are all created by me, with music provided by WeVideo and additional sound effects from freesound.com. Information from War History Online. If you enjoy learning about all the hidden beauties of World War II, please feel free to dive deeper on your own. Additionally, if you have something interesting and not commonly known you want to share about World War II, leave a comment. There's a possibility I might use it in another episode. Join me next time on Beyond the Battlefield.